These books didn't just cause controversy, they caused death, wars, genocide, torture, mass manipulation. And you probably haven't heard of most of them. Throughout human history, ideas written on paper have been more powerful than any weapon ever forged. Tonight, we're diving into 5 books that didn't just change minds, they ended lives. Books that became blueprints for some of humanity's darkest chapters. Some were written by madmen, others by scholars who thought they were helping society. But all of them share one terrifying truth. They turned readers into killers. The Malleus Maleficarum, the Hammer of Witches. The year is 1487. A German monk named Heinrich Kramer has just published what would become one of history's deadliest instruction manuals. Its title translates to The Hammer of Witches. This wasn't just another religious text. This was a how-to guide for identifying, prosecuting, and executing witches, and it worked terrifyingly well. The book claimed to provide scientific proof that witches existed. It described in horrific detail how to torture confessions out of accused women. It explained why women were more susceptible to evil than men, and it gave legal justification for mass murder. Within decades, the Malleus Maleficarum had spread across Europe like wildfire. It was reprinted over and over again, becoming one of the first bestsellers in history, and wherever it went, death followed. The witch trials that followed were beyond brutal. In the German town of Würzburg alone, over 900 people were burned alive in just 7 years. In Bamberg, another German city, the bishop used the book to justify killing over 1,000 people, including his own nephew and several clergy members. The book was so convincing that even educated judges and lawyers treated it as legal fact. For over 200 years, it remained the standard reference for witch hunters across Europe. Historians estimate that between 40,000 and 60,000 people were executed during the witch trials, with the Malleus Maleficarum serving as their death warrant. What makes this book so chilling is how methodical it was. Kramer didn't just write a rant about witches. He created a systematic approach to genocide, disguised as religious scholarship. He provided detailed instructions on how to break a person psychologically, how to extract confessions through torture, and how to justify it all in the name of God. The book's influence didn't end with the witch trials. Its methods of psychological manipulation and systematic persecution would be studied and copied by totalitarian regimes for centuries to come. Kampf, My Struggle. In 1924, a failed artist and imprisoned political agitator began writing what he called his struggle. Adolf Hitler's Mein Kampf would become the blueprint for World War II and the Holocaust. But here's what most people don't realize. When it was first published in 1925, almost nobody read it. The first volume sold poorly. Critics dismissed it as the ramblings of a political extremist. Even within his own party, many Nazis found it boring and difficult to read. So how did this ignored book eventually lead to the deaths of over 60 million people? The answer lies not in its initial reception, but in how it was systematically weaponized once Hitler came to power. The Nazi Party didn't just recommend the book, they made it mandatory reading. It was given as a wedding gift to newlyweds. Students had to study it in schools. Government officials had to demonstrate their knowledge of its contents. But the real power of Mein Kampf wasn't in its ideas alone. It was in how those ideas were packaged. Hitler didn't just write about his hatred of Jews and his plans for German expansion. He presented these ideas as scientific facts, backed by carefully constructed arguments about race, genetics, and national destiny. The book taught readers to see certain groups of people as less than human. It provided intellectual justification for violence, and it gave ordinary Germans permission to participate in atrocities by framing them as patriotic duties. By 1945, over 10 million copies had been distributed in Germany alone. The book had been translated into dozens of languages and spread Nazi ideology across the globe. In countries like Romania, Hungary, and Croatia, local fascist movements used Mein Kampf as a template for their own genocidal programs. Even today, the book remains controversial. It's banned in several countries, heavily restricted in others, and still used by neo-Nazi groups as a recruiting tool. In 2016, when Germany allowed its first reprint since World War II, it immediately became a bestseller again, proving that its dark appeal hasn't faded. The tragedy of Mein Kampf isn't just that it contained evil ideas. It's that it made those ideas seem reasonable to millions of ordinary people who should have known better. The Protocols of the Elders of Zion, history's deadliest lie. Imagine a book so convincing in its lies that it shaped the beliefs of dictators, inspired pogroms, and continues to fuel hatred over a century after it was written. The Protocols of the Elders of Zion is that book. Here's the twisted thing. Everyone involved in creating it knew it was fake. The Protocols was fabricated around 1903 by the Russian secret police, who plagiarized large sections from earlier fictional works. They literally copy-pasted from a French political satire and a German novel to create what they claimed was a secret Jewish conspiracy document. The book described an alleged meeting of Jewish leaders plotting to control the world through banks, media, and governments. It was complete fiction, designed to distract Russians from their real problems by giving them someone to blame. But lies, especially convincing lies, have a way of taking on lives of their own. Within years, the protocols had spread across Europe and America. Henry Ford, the American industrialist, distributed over 500,000 copies in the United States. In Germany, it became required reading in schools under the Nazi regime. Stalin used it to justify purges of Jewish intellectuals in the Soviet Union. The book's impact was measured in bodies. In Russia, it helped justify pogroms that killed thousands of Jews. In Nazi Germany, it was cited as evidence for the final solution. Even today, it's distributed by extremist groups and has been found in the manifestos of mass shooters. What makes the protocols so dangerous isn't just its anti-Semitic content, it's how it created a template for conspiracy thinking that's been applied to other groups throughout history. The same basic structure, the idea of a secret group plotting world domination, has been used to target communists, Muslims, immigrants, and dozens of other communities. In 1921, the Times of London definitively proved the protocols was plagiarized fiction. Court cases in Switzerland and South Africa legally established it as a forgery. Scholars have thoroughly debunked every claim it makes, and yet it continues to spread. The protocols represent something terrifying about human nature. Our willingness to believe lies that confirm our prejudices, even when we know they're lies. It shows how a fabricated document, created by cynical government agents, can outlive empires and continue killing long after its creators are dead. Today, you can still find copies being sold online, translated into dozens of languages, adapted for new audiences. A book that everyone knows is fake, but that continues to feel true to people looking for someone to blame for their problems. The Anarchist Cookbook, a teenager's deadly mistake. In 1971, a 19-year-old college student named William Powell was angry about the Vietnam War. So he wrote a book. The Anarchist Cookbook was supposed to be a protest against government authority, a middle finger to the establishment. Instead, it became a blueprint for domestic terrorism. Powell compiled instructions for making explosives, drugs, and weapons using household materials. He included sections on guerrilla warfare, sabotage techniques, and how to disrupt government operations. The book was part political manifesto, part dangerous chemistry set. Here's the tragedy. Powell later regretted writing it. As he grew older, he realized what he had unleashed. He spent decades trying to get the book banned, but it was too late. The damage was done. The Anarchist Cookbook has been linked to numerous terrorist attacks and mass shootings. The Columbine shooters had a copy. The Oklahoma City bomber Timothy McVeigh used its techniques. It's been found in the possession of school shooters, domestic terrorists, and extremist groups across the political spectrum. What makes this book particularly dangerous is how accessible it is. Unlike other books on this list, which spread through official channels or underground networks, the Anarchist Cookbook has been freely available for over 50 years. You can buy it on Amazon. You can download it from the internet. It's sitting on library shelves across America. The book doesn't just provide dangerous information. It packages that information with a philosophy that makes violence seem justified. It teaches readers that the system is corrupt, that authority must be resisted, and that extreme measures are not only acceptable but necessary. Powell himself became a Christian and an educator, spending his later years working with troubled youth. He publicly denounced his own book, calling it a misguided product of my adolescent anger. But by then, the book had taken on a life of its own. The Anarchist Cookbook represents a unique type of dangerous book, one whose author lived to see the consequences of his words and desperately wished he could take them back. It's a reminder that ideas, once released into the world, can't be controlled by their creators. Even today, every time there's a mass shooting or terrorist attack, investigators often find a copy of Powell's Teenage Rebellion sitting among the perpetrator's possessions, still inspiring violence decades after its author disowned it. The Turner Diaries, fiction that became reality. In 1978, a former physics professor turned white supremacist named William Luther Pierce published what he claimed was just a novel. The Turner Diaries told the story of a race war in America, ending with the systematic extermination of minorities and the establishment of a white ethnostate. Pierce wrote it under a pseudonym and initially sold it through mail-order catalogs and at gun shows. It was crude, poorly written, and filled with explicit descriptions of violence. Most people dismissed it as the fantasy of a racist extremist. They were wrong. The Turner Diaries became the most influential piece of domestic terrorist literature in American history. It didn't just inspire violence, it provided detailed instructions for carrying it out. The book described how to build truck bombs using agricultural fertilizer. It explained how to target federal buildings for maximum psychological impact. It outlined strategies for evading law enforcement and building underground resistance networks. On April 19, 1995, Timothy McVeigh parked a truck bomb outside the Alfred P. Murrah Federal Building in Oklahoma City. The bombing killed 168 people, including 19 children. When McVeigh was arrested, investigators found pages from the Turner Diaries in his car, with highlighted passages describing almost exactly what he had just done. But McVeigh wasn't the only one inspired by Pierce's fiction. The book has been linked to over 200 murders and numerous terrorist plots. The Order, a white supremacist group active in the 1980s, used it as their operational manual, robbing banks and murdering perceived enemies exactly as described in the book. What makes the Turner Diaries so dangerous is how it functions as both inspiration and instruction manual. It doesn't just promote racist ideology, it provides a step-by-step guide for turning that ideology into action. It takes abstract hatred and makes it concrete. The book continues to circulate in extremist circles today, often distributed alongside other hate literature at rallies and online forums. Law enforcement agencies consider possession of the book to be a warning sign of potential terrorist activity. Pierce died in 2002, but his fictional race war continues to inspire real-world violence. The book has been found in the possession of mass shooters, including the perpetrator of the 2019 El Paso Walmart shooting, who killed 23 people while specifically targeting Hispanic shoppers. The Turner Diaries proves that fiction can be just as dangerous as fact, especially when it provides detailed instructions for violence and frames that violence as heroic and necessary. These 5 books share something terrifying in common. They all transformed readers into killers. They took ordinary people, people who might have been your neighbors, your co-workers, your family members, and convinced them that murder was not only acceptable, but necessary. The Malleus Maleficarum convinced God-fearing Christians to burn their neighbors alive. Kampf persuaded an entire nation to participate in genocide. The protocols turned age-old prejudices into systematic persecution. The Anarchist Cookbook gave angry teenagers the tools to commit mass murder. The Turner Diaries transformed racist fantasies into terrorist reality. But here's what makes these books truly dangerous. They're still out there. Most of them are still in print. You can still buy them, download them, share them, and people do. In our digital age, dangerous ideas spread faster than ever before. A book that once took decades to cross continents can now reach millions of people in seconds. The same technologies that give us access to all human knowledge also give us access to all human hatred. So what can we do? How do we protect ourselves from ideas designed to destroy us? The answer isn't censorship. Banning books, even dangerous ones, often just makes them more appealing. The answer is understanding. When we understand how these books work, how they manipulate emotions and justify violence, we become immune to their influence. We need to teach people to recognize propaganda, to question sources, to think critically about what they read. We need to remember that just because something is written down, just because it claims to be based on science or religion or politics, doesn't make it true. Most importantly, we need to remember that ideas have consequences. The books we've discussed tonight weren't just abstract philosophical exercises. They were weapons that killed millions of people, and they're still loaded. The next time you encounter a book, an article, a social media post that tries to convince you that certain people are less than human, that violence is justified, that extreme measures are necessary, remember these 5 books. Remember the bodies they left behind, and choose to think instead of believe, to question instead of follow, to build instead of destroy. Because in a world full of dangerous books, the most dangerous thing of all is a mind that stops asking questions.